And it was called the Tyson School because years ago it was built for the community. See, there was a lot of people back in these mountains then. And they had a school, and they had school in it, and I think it was 1906 before they incorporated it and had it registered with the county is when it started school, but it was built before then. But they had school in it then for their own kids, see?
Uh-huh.
And then they went into the school system. I think it was 6. It says on the sign there. We're talking about the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians. And that's what it's not an Indian name. There is an Indian name for it, which I have it in some of my papers. But they called them Cow Creek. Then they called the Cow Creek over by Diamond Rock, comes from Riddle and goes up to Diamond Rock. That's Cow Creek. We used a lot of that land there clear over to Table Rock on the other side. That was all Tequila. Actually, we were Tequila speaking Indians. Well, we go to the South Umpqua Falls is where we done analysis of forensic analysis stuff of the bones. And we got over 3,500 years on a carbon date at the South Umpqua Falls. You know, and the overhang there from the bones and everything there, saying that everything matches everything else in our digs and everything that we do. Well, you go back on the ridges and you can go back here for miles and miles, and it's just wherever there's water, there's Indian sites. I mean, thousands. Had to be in the thousands because it was populated all over here, the whole areas. They had a teepee and they had a lodge and they had some overhangs which they put cedar around the fronts of them or something for the weather or something. And they had a plank house like made out of cedar and stuff like that. The saying goes that the cedar tree was the first tree that grew that was for the use of the Indian. They used the cedar trees. Well, they come in with the trade, the Northwest Fur Company and then the Hudson Bay Company, and then they come in and that started bringing them in. And then they traded with the Indians and they introduced them to smallpox and malaria through the mosquito. It's in history around Canyonville they died by the thousands from malaria. So it was, you know, that's a very little known fact, but it is a fact and it's in history. They made a treaty with us and never honored the treaty. They just took the land. And then they gathered up the Indians and what they didn't kill and took them to the reservation and that's what happened to the Indians. They gathered them up and took them away. Well, let's see, it's on record now, the treaty of the Cow Creek Treaty. That was the one that we used, and that's the one and it's on, of course, it's on record now and everything, of what they did and what they took away, and we finally settled the treaty in 1980 something. Well, I think they should study more of their culture, you know, and get into the culture more and get into the language more, and you know, that's the things you should do is study that. We don't really study the culture that much, you know. Get back and get into it and find out how they lived every day, what they did, and you know, and they do some of it, but they don't do it, you know, thorough.
Okay, so let's talk about your jewelry here. What do you got?
Okay, this is made this about 40 years ago. This is called a squash blossom necklace. All the stones are cut with a chisel and by hand. All the beads are done by hand. They're 2 pieces. And the holes on the beads, you can tell Indian beads because the hole comes from the inside out. Before you put the bead together, you solder it in the middle. I killed this bear in my woodshed eating my dog food. So I got this bear, and these are old quarters in the 1920s and stuff. There's a flying eagle. I make them into conchos. I put a keeper on the back so that they won't come off. The beads are trade beads. You see the different kind of trade beads. And this is another turquoise nugget I had wrapped in gold. And see that they're all trade beads. Nice piece.
Tell me about trade beads.
It's what they trade. The traders traded them to the Indians for furs and stuff, or beaver hides and stuff like that. They traded the beads to them. And we're finally getting even with them now. See, the beads weren't worth anything, and the beaver hides were. Now the beaver hides are not worth anything, and now the beads are. It took a while to come around. Yep. My first car was a Model T, and I built it up and run it. And I think my next one was a Model T, and when I was 13, I think, my dad had a Model A and it was sitting out there, and my brother tore the transmission out. It's a 1928 Model A, and he couldn't get a transmission for it because 3031s were different, see, and everything. Then I was a kid, see, and I'd ask him, I said, he just let it go, he couldn't fix it, that's it. I said, well, that runs good, I'd like to have that. He said, you can't fix it, I said, yeah, I can, because we've got a 31 transmission. I can take the gears out and put in this case and use the spline out of that and do that. He said, you can't do that. So one day I kept having to give it to me. That night it was running. That night. That evening it was running.
That's great.
And so the next day he said, well, what are you going to do with it? You can't drive it. And he went to town the next day, and my neighbor up here, Dale Bratton, come down, and he could drive. Well, just barely drive, Like his brother said, he didn't know which way to turn the wheel next.
Uh-huh.
So we got out here, and it's all around out here, see, and we went through there and had that old Model A going through everything, and old Dale said, I think you're ready for the road. You haven't hit anything. I said, I think so. So cut it down, went out here and turned. We went up on two wheels. It was wide open through here, turned, go down the road. We're on two wheels. Made that corner and went down there. I've been driving ever since.